Before we start tonight's or this afternoon's meeting, I'd like to do the acknowledgement of country. Community Voice Australia Central Coast would like to begin today's presentation by acknowledging the original custodians of this land on which we are meeting. We recognise their continuing connection to these lands, waters and communities, and we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to give a quick thank you to Narara Eco Village for having us here today. Here within the Narara Eco Village, their aim is to live in harmony with nature, preserving natural habitats on the village land and build a home within a minimal environment impact, which considers orientation, thermal mass, planting for privacy and temperature control, insulation, energy efficiency and environmentally friendly materials, as well as the eco-friendly water supply, power, drainage, garbage disposal and recycling. Perfect place to have today's meeting, I reckon. So just to do a short introduction to Community Voice Australia Central Coast for those of you that haven't heard of us before. We formed to advocate for transparency and accountability from all levels of government, council and associated bodies. We support initiatives that protect and enhance the environment, the well-being and quality of life of our community and country. We believe people have the right to transparent information regarding any plans affecting their lives and the community has the right to an effective voice in the decision making. Do I hear a here? Gisela is an important team player here with Community Voice Australia Central Coast. Gisela is going to outline a few of our values, and Gisela will also give a brief outline of the offshore wind turbine project that is currently open for community consultation, along with a short video presentation. Gisela, come on up. Give her a round.
Thank you all for coming here today. Nice to see familiar faces and not so familiar faces, so welcome you all. So, just read you our pledge. So, Community Voice Australia Central Coast is committed to remaining non-partisan and independent. We pledge to uphold the value of integrity, transparency and responsibility when serving the community in which we live. We stand for peaceful, non-violent action and interaction, fostered in an environment of respect and collaboration. And this is why we are here all today in this space of respect, collaboration, and respect each other, respect different opinion and different. So I welcome you all in that. So all your voices can be heard here today in this beautiful space. So why we're here today? We are putting this talk at this time as the Hunter offshore renewable energy infrastructure is open for community submission until April 28th of this month, 28th of this month. The area proposed is 10 kilometers off the New South Wales Hunter coast with wind turbine height of 240 meters above sea level. The area runs from Nora Head to Port Stephens. If the Minister, Chris Bowen, declared the area and feasibility license are granted, developers will allow to investigate an area and begin planning their project. It looks as though OceanX, that is an Australian company, is lined up to take the offshore wind contract. OceanX has partnered with Equinor. Equinor is an international energy company headquartered in Norway, so a global energy giant who operates oil and gas field globally and in Australia, to develop offshore wind project in New South Wales. Additionally, at state level, EDF Renewable has acquired the Newcastle offshore wind project. EDF has announced the acquisition of the Newcastle offshore wind farm, NOW, a floating offshore project currently under development. EDF is a French nuclear giant, predominantly government-owned. So in all transformation, it is essential that the public understand the power structure being implemented and the ramification of this, especially as well all the cumulative effect on the environment. On this note, I would like to show you a 10-minute video regarding a US investigation into whales and dolphin death due to the impact of offshore wind infrastructure on marine life. Clean Ocean Action Executive Director Cindy Zwift testified about the need to halt offshore development pending a comprehensive independent investigation. At the end of the video, we'll be hearing from our specialist speakers. Thank you.
Hearing on offshore wind development in the region, and also to Representatives Smith, Harris, and Perry for attending. Having the focus of congressional leaders is such a breath of fresh air and most welcome to provide much needed attention to the recent unprecedented death of marine mammals and the ocean industrialization that is underway off our coast. And I also want to thank all of you for being here today. We know what the power of the people can do. My name is Cindy Zwift, and I am Executive Director of Clean Ocean Action. Our name is our mission. We advocate for a clean and healthy ocean with action, and for nearly 40 years, we've stood together with all of you. We've stood together with strong bipartisan support and thousands of citizens, and we've stopped ocean dumping, blocked many, many, many fossil fuel projects, and brought the ocean in this region back from the brink of collapse. Together, after hard work for decades with many people in this room, including the longtime support of Representatives Van Drew and Smith, the ocean off the Jersey Shore is now thriving with marine life, and we must keep it that way. It is important to say from the outset that Clean Ocean Action is not opposed to renewable energy, particularly on land, where it is cheaper and easier than to maintain. Clean Ocean Action is also open to the idea of some offshore wind, but only should a pilot-scale project be proven successful and the science is there to support industrial-scale power plants while protecting the ocean. Make no mistake, the living resources on the planet are in crisis. Climate change is real, and Clean Ocean Action concurs with the UN Environment Program that calls for a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, 30% by 2030. Reducing fossil fuel is critical toward this goal. It is also important to note the ocean is our best buffer to climate change by absorbing nearly 90% of all the heat we've been pumping in and over 50% of the CO2. Now, while some offshore wind may hold promise, federal and state agencies have moved forward without public transparency, robust and sound science, and good governance. According to the National Marine Fisheries Service, by 2030, offshore wind power plants, as you said, Congressman, will cover up to 2.4 million acres of seafloor with 3,400 turbines requiring 10,000 miles of cable with an additional 5.7 million acres under further consideration. This is too much too fast, and in a word, simply reckless. Marine life is being placed at grave risk without scientific due diligence, monitoring, and protection to ensure the ocean survives this massive industrialization. Indeed, the ocean and the coast will be vastly transformed and industrialized, and the public would still likely be in the dark if it weren't for the outrageously grim and tragic number of whale and dolphin deaths. Since December, 12 whales have washed up on the beaches just of New York and New Jersey. These innocent, gentle giants are now buried on our beaches or dumped in a landfill. Marine mammals are important and protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. They are revered by the public, which was evident when nearly 1,000 people attended the World Whale Day rally in Point Pleasant, which was organized by concerned citizens Leslie Mangold and Tricia DeVoe. As we know, some whales are close to extinction. Most at risk is the North Atlantic right whale, which is on the brink, and the Endangered Species Act was enacted to protect these species. Under these laws, the government must protect marine mammals, yet permission is given to harass. This permission is called takes, which are issued by the National Marine Fisheries Service, incidental take authorizations. Offshore wind has many threats to marine life. In fact, the National Marine Fisheries Service says offshore wind can, and I quote, increase ocean noise, which can affect the behavior of fish, whales, and other species, introduce electromagnetic fields that can impact navigation, predator detection, communication, and the ability for fish and shellfish to find mates, change existing habitats by altering local or regional hydrodynamics, read the cold pool or the thermocline, create a reef effect where marine life cluster around hard surfaces of wind developments, impact organism life cycle stages, including larval dispersal and spawning, change species composition, abundance, distribution, and survival rates, release contaminants that can be consumed or absorbed by marine life, and this last one I should emphasize, increase vessel traffic, which could lead to more vessel strikes. What a list. National Marine Fisheries Service knows offshore wind is harmful. They conclude with, as Congressman Smith said, offshore wind is a new use of the ocean which requires substantial scientific and regulatory review. We agree. So where is this substantial review? Where is also the commitment to the precautionary principle? With that said, in January, with whale number 5 on the beach, Clean Ocean Action was deeply concerned by the unprecedented whale deaths and began to investigate. Cory Martin, Clean Ocean Action's advocacy campaign manager, totaled up all the marine takes that were issued. In all, an unprecedented 11 companies were authorized to take a total of 63,820 marine mammals, just off the Jersey and New York coasts. These were what is called level B takes, which allows for the potential to disturb mammals, including but not limited to migration, breathing, nursing, breeding, feeding, and sheltering, all which are required for life. Now, in less than 3 months, we're up to 12 dead whales that we know of, and many dolphins and many dolphins as well, including one just yesterday. It is important to note that these allowed harassments numbers are only for, quote, pre-construction activities for the multiple offshore wind projects. The much louder construction, much louder construction activities that prompt more severe takes and higher numbers of impacted animals are next. Clean Ocean Action continues to assert that these deaths of dolphins could be plausibly caused by the survey work. In January, Clean Ocean Action, with the support of additional groups, called on President Biden to conduct a transparent and independent scientific investigation and pause this offshore wind pre-construction activity. While there is much in the media of the agencies insisting there is no connection between offshore wind and these deaths, given the list I just read and how significant the potential is for harm, why wouldn't it be plausible? Where is the evidence to prove that there is no connection? COA has additional evidence that there were at least 6 survey vessels within close proximity with each other off the Atlantic and Cape May counties conducting sonar and other geotechnical activities. These could have caused cumulative effects with these multiple sonar activities. In fact, since December, offshore wind surveying, which consists of the intense back and forth erratic activity of these survey boats, has increased. And I do also want to note that large commerce shipping to the port decreased by 20%. So offshore wind activity increased, large ship activity decreased. Why is there such an immediate rejection and defensive response to offshore wind as a plausible cause? There has not been any in-depth federal assessment, just denials. Clean Ocean Action continues to call for the investigation. However, access to information is difficult, and we hope that the members of Congress may be able to help us. We need to get access to the automated identification system data for all the ships engaged in offshore wind activities. We want reports from the survey boats, necropsy reports, acoustic buoy data. We need to have all this information. If the federal government isn't going to do the research, we must. There is strong support for action and concern. Launched on World Whale Day, over 300,000 people have signed COA's petition for the investigation into these marine deaths and a pause to this reckless fast-tracking. It seems our government is at best putting the cart before the horse and wants to view offshore wind while only wearing green-colored glasses. Our ocean deserves better. We must save our ocean. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Well, that's a bit of an eye-opener. I think it's quite amazing how it's almost like we have to prove there's a connection before the government proves that there's a connection. It's a bit odd. Just to put these into perspective too, Sally, you were saying that the wind turbines are 240 metres high. To give you a bit of an idea for those of you that aren't great with visual, a bit taller than the Harbour Bridge, a bit shorter than the Centre Point Tower.
And then they're lower down under the sea.
And then they're lower down. So it's a massive structure. So up next, I would like to introduce to you Michael Swift. Michael is a long-term grassroots environmentalist. In 2014, after witnessing the takeover of the anti-fracking movement by American-funded NGOs, he launched his first environmental blog, We Suspect Science, which was noticed by environmental writer and activist Cory Morningstar. In 2015, he became part of the wrong kind of green critical thinking collective. Michael writes on a broad range of environment-related issues and specialises in analysis of the political will for new energy development and the capture of environmentalism by billionaires and impact philanthropists. Michael will be discussing with us today the broad energy transition with a focus on the damage done to environmentalism by the climate campaign takeover.
Well, thanks for having me today. My name's Michael Swift. I'd like to thank Community Voice Central Coast for inviting me, and a special thank you to Kate Mason, who's been very supportive of my work in the past. I'm going to move to my first slide because that's a really basic proposition, and I think we'll all understand it. And that is that sustainable development is still development, and as we know, almost no development gets done properly, and that's what we'd like to do. And I think if we could have transparency and honesty from governments and who do the due diligence in allowing these development projects to happen, then we would have an advantage because the truth will speak for itself. But that's not what's happening. So I'm going to just start with a few general questions. I'm not going to spell out exactly who benefits in my talk, but I think the answer to that is very simple, and that is the establishment, business as usual, the powers that be, the big corporations who now are implementing most of these large-scale renewable projects. So I'm going to be looking at the big picture and how communities can produce intelligence to embarrass power and gain power and empower their own communities. So here's my outline. Just going to give you a few moments to read that. Okay, so I'll start with the global energy context. I have a, I guess, a unique position, having researched renewable energy, looking at the issue of base load back starting in 2010 when I was volunteering with Friends of the Earth in Brisbane, and Beyond Zero Emissions were looking at a plan to distribute renewable energy, 100% renewable energy around Australia, and I tried to engage with them around the issue of base load. And as you might know, it's all up in the air about whether we can have a renewable system with enough storage to deliver energy at night and deliver the energy at the loads that our current grids require. So my overall theory, my novel theory, is that climate alarmism has been about a value-adding scheme for big fossil fuels, and they have been pushing forward renewables, creating the illusion of a renewables boom, whilst quietly in the background and unreported by people with particular narratives, like particular people in the media and NGOs, they have been building opportunities for fossil fuels to continue. And I'm going to go into more detail about that. So I argue that there's no large-scale transition to renewables off fossil fuels, that what we're really looking at is a gambit, and I'll return to that later. This is a really tricky point to explain, and I've explained it in detail in many of my pieces, but what I'm going to tell you about now is how the just transition process is failing. So we can start with a group called The Leap in Canada, which has started and now has been mothballed. They claim to have been taking a Green New Deal approach to the energy transition in Canada, and they often conflate the term clean energy with renewable energy. And in my research, I've found that clean energy means whatever you want it to mean. And a lot of leaders say clean energy when they have a position in favor of carbon capture and storage and ongoing fossil fuels. So, so there's a just transition where people like Naomi Klein and Sephora Berman aren't talking about the fact that Canada is a world leader in carbon capture and storage and has the largest CO2 pipeline in the world. In Australia, we have Amanda Cahill from nexteconomy.org. Her plans were well promoted, but have fallen fairly flat. And in the US, while the NGOs and the Democrats were trying to push the Green New Deal, in early April of 2019, they rejected a group called New Consensus, which were trying to bring a bunch of different groups in, especially groups representing people of color, rejected what are called the Jemez principles. So I'll show you these. Okay, it's not advancing that slide, just a moment. There you go. I'll let you read those. So they're very admirable principles, and I think if governments and corporations align themselves with those principles, and if, of course, environmental movements actually align themselves with these principles, then we might be looking at a more honest discussion about a just transition. But I don't think that's what's happening. A key point, and I would like to direct you towards my research. I'll provide some links to Community Voice a bit later on, but it's a piece called Briefing Sustainable Development Goal 13 and the Carbon Capture Boom. And in that, I outline that through the entire global climate consensus process, no real obstacles have been put in front of carbon capture and storage for fossil fuels. Quite conveniently, there's no actual obstacles in any commitments that any governments make under nationally determined contributions or net zero balance sheets. Show you there. That's a quote from my sustainable development piece. Okay, so I look a lot at language. I'm a semantic pedant by nature, which makes me good at critical theory and dissecting language and what words really mean, the ones that are dog whistles, the ones that are merely rhetorical devices. And clean energy is one of those terms. There you go. So clean energy, as I said before, can be used by certain leaders, and I'll give you an example very soon, to include whatever type of energy they want. And one of those leaders is the boss man of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol. And I think that's the next slide. So I also wrote a piece last year about the language of the COP26 meeting and the fossil fuel phase-out commitments. And I went into detail looking at what media actually said and what they reported and what the NGOs reported and what was in the actual language of the commitments. And you'll find that every reference to phasing out fossil fuels actually contains the qualifier unabated, which means without carbon capture and storage applied. And if you want to find that piece, it'll be in my linked list, and it contains lots and lots of evidence that there's a carbon capture boom coming and that the NGOs and certain media are ignoring it because it doesn't suit the prescribed narratives that they adhere to. So here you see, I've transcribed a tweet from Fatih Birol after he met Justin Trudeau. And if you look at the second paragraph there, he frames renewable energy with nuclear and carbon capture and storage. So he's saying that to the leader of the most advanced carbon capture and storage economy on the planet that has just introduced a tax credit that's going to subsidize new CO2 pipelines similar to the Alberta carbon trunk line that they already have. So next slide. So there's a definition of clean energy as a rhetorical term. I got someone online who said that they were using ChatGPT to ask it about clean energy. And, you know, I'm not a big fan of AI or whatever, but as a sentiment aggregating, smart sentiment aggregating piece of software, it concurred with my assessment that there's no agreed meaning of what clean energy means. So you've got pro-renewable organizations that have clean energy in their name, and so they have to stick with that language, even though there are any number of pundits around the world and politicians who mean something else when they say it. So in 2016, I had already collected dozens and dozens of quotes from leaders that put clean energy, the language, into perspective. And I thought maybe something would change and that maybe some thinkers or someone writing in the New York Times might actually twig to the problems with the language, but they have not. So that was nearly 7 years ago. Right. So a lot of you might have already come to the conclusion that net zero is full of holes and opportunities for big business and for governments to obfuscate. And you're right. It is put most simply, it's a carbon accounting scam. It's an accounting outcome. It's what happens on a ledger. And so in effect, you're turning worthless manufactured offsets into something as valuable as actually avoided emissions or any real attempt to reduce emissions. So in the mix goes avoided emissions from afforestation, carbon offsets, and carbon capture and storage, and supposedly low emissions renewables. In the end, what net zero does is it mystifies what's real about the changing energy landscape. So there you go. I'm explaining again that it's an accounting outcome. The important thing to understand is that there's a difference between mitigation and management of emissions. Management of emissions is doing ledger work, whereas mitigation is meant to be doing something real. But I don't think we're seeing a lot of actual real mitigation, and the damage that's being done in order to implement the renewables we are seeing is too much. Okay. So the language behind green energy. Oh yeah, this is more explanation of net zero as creating opportunities, and here I open up how it's creating opportunities for biofuel and for a component of the IPCC Working Group 3 scenarios, pathways that they present in their well-publicized reports, that is called biofuel with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. It occupies a large portion of the mitigation budgets of the majority of the scenarios that have been offered by the IPCC for the last decade. And interestingly, a notable person who concurs with that assertion is the president-designate of COP26, the CEO of ADNOC, the state oil company of the United Arab Emirates. So, you know, a very prominent fossil fuel is pointing to the IPCC and referring to it in a way that is the opposite of what the green groups are doing. I want to point out a particular figure. This is Farhana Yaman is a former IPCC policy wonk and a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, and her NGO Track 1 understands perfectly how taking a position in favor of BECCS requires having a concession position for carbon capture and storage. The problem is that these people that favor BECCS, like Farhana Yaman, and the people who don't talk about it at all, like a lot of these green groups, don't talk about just how much big oil and gas will ensure themselves a future in order to allow a little bit of BECCS to happen to make the net zero budgets work. So, I mean, this stuff is really challenging, and it's a lot to take in, and it's the result of, you know, 10 years of obsessive research. And now it's going to get a little bit trickier. I'm going to explain something that I already know is really hard to explain, and it relates to how the notion of renewables boom is either inflated or manufactured so that the general public feel that it's probably happening, and that it creates hope in the people that would really like to see it happen. So I use a short phrase to try and describe it. I could say a gambit makes a talking point, and I'll go on to explain this a little bit further. There's a definition of a gambit. So basically, what I understand it as is that allowing a renewables boom to appear to be happening giving enough leeway so the big corporations will buy into it and begin to develop enough is a way of manufacturing false hope and creating a false narrative that even people who totally disagree with it can latch onto, false narrative that certain green groups can latch onto and be permanently misdirected by. So in that spirit, I'll talk about 3 groups, or there's 4 groups. One is Deep Green Resistance, who have put out a book and a documentary called Bright Green Lies. And the fundamental premise of that book is that the powers that be want a renewables revolution, and when they deliver it, it's going to do all this damage. So in part, they're siding with the thrust of today's meeting. And in another part, they're caught up in the inflated action that is part of the renewables gambit. Another group is there was a documentary called Planet of the Humans that Mike Moore produced, and it started with the same premise that that if there was going to be a renewables revolution, and that's apparently what the Democrats want and the NGOs want, then they're going to want to do it properly. And there are a whole lot of problems with biomass in the US and the actual effectiveness of solar and just how much you need and how much storage actually works or how much is needed. Again, that documentary completely missed developments in the Senate and expansions in tax credits in the law in the US that the NGOs didn't look at, and the Green New Deal proponents didn't bother to look at, that these tax credits, these new tax credits for carbon capture and storage that are seeing multiple new pipelines being installed in the Midwest are were included in the Inflation Reduction Act. So an act widely billed as being about a renewables revolution was actually included what the Carbon Capture Coalition, which is a whole bunch of oil companies and unions, called a monumental expansion. It's basically a massive subsidy for big oil, gas, biomass, and coal. And in Canada, as I said before, they've brought in their own tax credit very recently. So here's another way of explaining a gambit. You can't say you're having a renewables revolution without actually having something that looks like a renewables revolution. So you have other people who have jumped onto this and kind of pushed this messaging. A researcher called Mark Jacobson puts out regular research pieces that refuse to look at how much carbon capture and storage is advanced and what legal developments actually allow it to expand. And he always argues that we could go to 100% renewables. And that's actually quite a significant assertion, that you can make a whole economy go to 100% renewables. And I don't think he ever achieves it. I also wanted to mention that the father of steady state development, the ecological economist Herman Daly, celebrated by many. Well, in 1991, a year before the first Earth Summit, where Agenda 21 was first mooted, he went to the World Bank for a year and took a concept with him called rights to pollute. In effect, he was saying that if we're going to have a steady state economies, we need to use government power to ensure that the rights to pollute are responsibly delivered to the appropriate people. I don't know that he would like what we're seeing today, even though he only died recently and he's never spoken out about it. So something to think about. Here's an example of oftentimes when I see an article in European press, especially because Europe's a really good example, where they claim that renewables are going gangbusters and there's a renewable revolution, and there's photos of wind farms and talk about electrifying aluminium smelters and stuff. I go and look at the raw figures to see just how much of a lie that claim is. And here's just one example. It was commissioned by the European Union, and it shows that the majority of renewables in Europe are actually biomass switched for coal in old-fashioned coal-fired power stations. So that doesn't sound very renewable to me. Some critics say that it produces more CO2 than burning the coal in the first place. So there's a perfect example of inflating the renewables boom to make it seem more significant than it is. So you really got to wonder about how whiz-bang renewables is when that's going on. Okay, so I'm going to talk about reinventing environmentalism in terms of the things that we can do as ordinary people. I got to speak with one of the attendees over Zoom beforehand, which was really nice. Grant and I got to just sit in the green room and talk with these two lovely people. And the lady Rosie said that she'd put in a submission, and that's excellent. I applaud that. I want everybody to become researchers. If I tried to convert anyone to anything, it'd be a researcher, be an advocate, be an organizer like Kate. This needs to happen. So I'm going to explain my experience, or my way of explaining my experience of watching the fracking movement and the environment movement being taken over by the climate justice movement. I explain it as what they're wielding, the weapon they're wielding is an omni problem that they can play as a trump card over any other environmental problem, because the whole lot will go out the window if climate catastrophe happens. And that may or may not be the case. The point is that it's been weaponized against us, catastrophized to engender fear rather than empower us to do something material about it. And now we're witnessing sustainable development with all the ugly characteristics of old-fashioned development. Next one. Oh yes, I wanted to talk, before I go into detail about networked hegemony, I wanted to talk about the groups that actually transformed the movement in Australia. The Sunrise Project was at one point funded, and this is revealed in WikiLeaks, by the Sandler Foundation. It was launched by a guy called John Hepburn, who helped co-author the Stopping the Coal Export Boom plan in Australia. That plan welcomed 350.org in Australia. 350.org was incubated by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund Sustainable Development Project. Now, in 2014, when I first read about this, I thought, what the hell has sustainable development got to do with climate activism? Well, I've discovered very much what it has to do, and it's about shaping the conversation so that organic resistance doesn't interfere with groups that are well controlled by the narrative. And, if you want to ask if that's the reality, you can look at Bill Clinton and John Podesta and ask yourself if those people are capable or interested in taking over activism for their own agendas. Yes, I'll go on to the next slide. So the climate takeover had an impact on the fracking movement. I was actively involved. I'd helped co-launch a campaign called Zombie a Frack. I was running a news feed for about 2 years, getting great metrics, and we had done some direct actions that had national press. And then I watched as environmental law firms and NGOs kind of plucked off the talented campaigners and gave them nice jobs. And I watched as Lock the Gate Alliance changed its remit from fracking to inappropriate mining, and that kind of brought it into coal mining and the Galilee Basin developments. And it kind of lost the fervor that it had when I would be talking to people farmers who lived out in the regions, people who lived in regional centres, as well as people in Brisbane, and we were working collectively to try and share information with each other. But that all kind of got zeroed out, and the funding started coming from people who wanted local environmental groups to attach their issues somehow to climate. So I was really impressed a while back when Kate did an interview with Constitutional Awareness Australia, and I totally agree. We need to become citizen lawyers. We need to become researchers. We need to analyse legislation, and I'm always happy to help people in doing that. I've managed to open up some little cracks in democracy because I call up people and I interrogate them and I do my homework. I found some committees in Brisbane, and now cycling campaigners they told me I couldn't be there at first, and now it's well known that members of the public can go there. They can text their local councillor and see if the councillor will pitch a question for them. They can approach the media and get something done. And I think this is something that's really important. I also want to talk about this idea of fiduciary responsibility. It's basically, the simplest definition is acting in good faith for another. So I assert that when I contact institutions or I make a submission, I say I'm exercising my fiduciary responsibility as a citizen of this state or this nation, and governments know that I'm a resident and they know I'm a citizen, and I have rights to speak with people and ask them questions on that basis, and I assert those rights. And I think it's a good way to think about how we approach being advocates for the general good. Okay, this is my last section. I hope I'm sticking in time. Embarrassing power with good intelligence is a sentence that I made up, combining the key principles of two campaigners. I want to use them because they're iconic, not because I necessarily am totally in love with what they do. The first one is Stan Goff. Now, Stan Goff was an anti-war campaigner, and he wrote this amazing piece that one of Cory Morningstar's mentors shared, and I always go back to it. And he talks about generating intelligence, and I'm going to share a quote, and I want you to take the time to read it and think about it. It blew my mind when I read it, because I thought, yeah, this is what I'm trying to do, and it's proved itself as I've applied that lesson over time through right to information requests, freedom of information request, administrative disclosure, generally interrogating public servants when I manage to get them on the phone, writing submissions, all that sort of stuff. So here we go. Okay. So Saul Alinsky was one of the pioneers of community organizing, and he managed to embarrass power. One of his earliest methodologies was to present the powers that be with a dramatic demonstration of the problem that they weren't solving. So, you know, collect a whole lot of rats, dump them on the steps of City Hall to demonstrate that the people aren't happy with City Hall not dealing with the rat problem. that sort of thing. Now, some people have questions about his agenda. His name is tarnished by Obama, you know, but the point is that he managed to identify that power is able to be claimed in the public sphere, and he developed techniques in order to help communities claim that power in the public sphere. That's what I did as a public transport advocate in Southeast Queensland, and engaged the media in order to do that, and used every bit of organic reach and access that I could on social media in order to achieve that. So I swear by it. And I guess I learned it because I read his book, Rules for Radicals, when I was 19, an angry young man. And there's a quote that puts it very simply. Now, I want to end with a quote from a person I mentioned earlier, Jay Tarber. He was one of Cory Morningstar's mentors, and this is from an interview that she did with him that a former comrade of mine published in Southeast Queensland. And I go back to this regularly. I shared it with Kate because I think she deserves to hear things like this. And it applies not only to writers, but to advocates and idealists and activists, and to anyone who works really hard to try and be a voice for their community. So I'm going to finish with this, and I'd like to thank you for listening to me today, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Well, that was all taken. But thanks for that information, Michael. It's fantastic. Next up, I'd like to introduce Grant Piper. Grant Piper is a fifth-generation farmer using holistic rotational grazing principles wherever possible. When the central west of New South Wales was designated as the Central Coast West Orana Renewable Energy Zone in 2022, Grant started to investigate the effects of the wind turbines on the environment, farming land and community. This led to Grant and other concerned community members forming a Uabry-Tonga Alliance, whose mission is to protect, preserve and enhance the native habitat and wildlife for the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone. Grant is going to be discussing with us the implications of wind turbines, introducing environmental impacts on farms, land and community, as well as the implications of the large foreign corporations being awarded the contracts. Let's welcome.
Thanks for inviting me on. Oop, I am unmuted. You've got me. Thumbs up. Thanks for the introduction. It's probably more than I can cover today, but I'll just try and give it what we've been doing out here and what might be happening down the road, and hopefully some strategies for dealing with that, which sort of ties into what Michael was talking about, because I think it's important that we all have some strategy in what we're doing. It's not just random letter writing, if you like, though that's better than, and it's a great start. Now, I see the slides up there. It's not directly relevant, but some background out here. Yes, we were sort of blindsided. We weren't really looking on the horizon to what was coming, and then found out that Energy Co or Transgrid at the time wanted to put a power line over some of our farmland, and that got us started. And then a local group formed to the east of us, the Uabry-Tonga Alliance, which we joined to try and move that Transgrid power line. And we put money into that and we put effort into that, and we did get the Transgrid line moved. And again, tying into the corporates, Transgrid is 70% owned by Saudi Arabian wealth super company, I believe, and the rest is Canadian and some others. So even name, heard about it for years. It's not a statutory, well, it's given statutory authority status, but it's actually a these days. And when you look into it, most of these organisations are. Anyway, that was defeated. We got that move, came home and had and realised that there was a second wind farm development proposed on the next ridge west of us and elsewhere around Coolah, and this was on top of another wind farm which had been in process for about 12 or so years and actually had development approval to the north of Coolah. So together, the two projects are 370, 250 metre high turbines surrounding the town of Coolah, and obviously all surrounding farmland is affected as well. And then you've got the necessary power lines to get that power out to the east coast and to the grid. And so one of the power lines was slated to go down the valley where we live, between us and neighbours, and with our neighbours in the local village of Uabry, we formed the Uabry-Tonga Alliance to try and protect our immediate area. And that does include the township of Coolah, which is surrounded by these two massive wind farms. But we didn't form it, well, I don't know, we didn't form it to take on the whole res. We didn't form it to speak for Coolah, but sort of by default, and because no one else has stepped up, we've sort of the organiser for the Coolah district, and we've also allied with other groups in the area, in the central west res, to push back against the whole res concept. And the slide on the screen there now, you see the area, that's the central west res. And to the north and east, you'll see Arndale, and that's the New England res. And sorry, whoever's handling the slides, one, please. I'll get to the point of the talk now. Can we go back? Oh, no, back. And again. So this is from the AEMO website. This is integrated system plan, if you go searching for that. All the way up and down the east coast and across southern Australia is slated for development. I wish there was another word we could use besides development, but I haven't found it yet, for all these renewables. And again, renewables is a misnomer, but that's all of the eastern tablelands, the Great Dividing Range country, which is all agricultural or forested. Energy projects. I mean, the impact of that on food supply, the pollution of the water and the land, and the interference with animals, native, domestic animals, the risks are enormous, and they're not really very well specified. It seems like ultimately don't do any research on anything they don't want to know about, and so, as you said, it's left to us to pick up the pieces and try and make the case that this is just not viable. So that's the AEMO's integrated strategic plan in a broad brush outline there. Next slide, please. And that's the development of the reses 2029, 2030. And the next, and off to the east coast, you'll see the two blue blobs, Wollongong, Newcastle. They're the offshore reses as per the AEMO plan. Last year I pulled these off. And next slide, please. And 2049 to 2050. And you can see the growth in concentration of energy projects in those res areas. The growth of the reses, but interestingly and relevant is the offshore reses don't growth. They're still just the same blue sausages they have a reason. That gives me some expect those offshore reses are a bit of a red herring. I might be wrong, but I sort of think they appeared lately in AEMO integrated strategic plan years. Yeah, I don't know whether it might be into what about they make this big sense about how we're going to transition to renewable stuff. but in reality, they never expect to build. Maybe that's a positive to take out, that it's just noise. It's not actually intended to wait, which I hope. Okay, next slide, please. This is pulled off the AMO website a couple of nights ago, and this talks about the offshore reses. And if you look down the bottom of the slide, it basically says there's no existing committed or anticipated wind generation for this res. And that's the paragraph on the left is 2030. And the paragraph, the same, no anticipated wind generation. Haven't got from proponents yet to build anything offshore. And again, that might be out of date with what the introduction said about the French EDF. Maybe there is somebody who is taking up a contract to develop something there. So, or as of the other week, still weren't any people willing money down to start developing those offshore reses. Maybe we can take. And this is getting into Michael's territory. It's just realisation. They need to keep the economic as they see it, and anything that pumps GDP is good, and they need to generate economic activity, even if it's detrimental in the long term and results in a net negative cost to everyone and to the real economy. Because really, there's many people have done analyses of the renewable energy, proposals, whether they're wind, solar, or even carbon capture. I'm sorry to say, it doesn't add up, or batteries, or pumped hydro, or micro hydro. It doesn't provide industrial scale power needed to run first world economy. It can be debated, but it just doesn't make any engineering sense. It doesn't make any economic sense. It doesn't make any ecological sense. And it's inefficient to start with. And that is something we'll get onto shortly. So why do they do it? Next slide, please. This was something I used last year. And again, a friend in the group just quickly Googled it. And there are Senate reports from several years ago stating that for every wind turbine gets 500 to 700 subsidy. Since they changed the way they subsidize the wind turbines, but it's still subsidy would not be, the rate of the country is the way I see it. It's a terrible situation to be in. Next slide, please. I'm not an expert on the offshore reses, but a quick search around, and as you've highlighted, the tide is turning against offshore wind. There have been offshore projects built overseas. They have that experience. We know that the cost, maintenance cost, the construction cost, environmental cost of example. The introductory video showed it. People don't want these things, and cost is not worth it, and isn't even acknowledged by the establishment in many cases. And a local case, next slide, please. Yep. So again, this is 2021, 35,000 humpback whales to pass by Port Stephens in that whale watching season. And I remember when I was flying at Williamtown, we'd go offshore and you'd see the pods of whales transiting south, transiting north around about June of the year, May, June. I can't remember whether they're going south or north then, but it happens. It's a great tourist attraction, and it's a wonderful thing to see, and it will potentially, or will be, by these offshore turbines if they build them. Again, with what Michael says, I think the viability of actually building half the stuff they have on the drawing board is simply not there. I don't believe we don't have the financial capacity. Senate estimates with Senator Rennick a few months ago questioned the AMO and others, and the finance, the money that's allocated to build the power required to interconnect all these energy projects it simply isn't enough. It will to rebuild power line network inside out to get this distributed production to where it's needed to the concentrated consumers is the exact opposite of the way our line and energy infrastructure has been built currently to distribute concentrated production to all the regions. Slide, please. The AMO data, their own data from 2022, showed that wind only had 29%, wind projects only had 29% utilisation. That means that for every 1,000 megawatt installed, they only deliver 290 to the grid. They're just terribly inefficient. Most of the time, they sit there idle. Was even, might have been 15% utilisation. Make a note of it. In my mind, that incredibly low. They'll never, you know, the lifetime for the cost of construction, the ecological cost of mining the minerals and transporting them around, and then installing. Oh yeah, it's just, and then build the power lines to connect them. It makes no engineering whatsoever. Next slide, please. In contrast, numbers, this is thermal efficiency. All these other more conventional power production techniques have, you know, 90+% utilisation. You know, if you've got a 2,000 megawatt power station, it delivers that, you know, 99% of the year, unless it's their maintenance. So, you know, coal though, thermal efficiency is 33 to 45%, gas 42%. The best current thermal power system is combined cycle gas turbine at 60%, and that's where they use the exhaust gas from the gas turbine to heat steam to then drive a turbine, steam turbine. Internal combustion engine, like in your car, for example, is 27 to 40%, and 40 is very, very, very rare. That's really the peak of engineering at the present. So what we're living with internal combustion engines are terribly inefficient, but that's, you know, not that far removed from what is 3%, which similarly, one of the reasons is they haven't tried that hard because it's so easy to make the amount of power that they have the ultimate inefficiency, but they are working on it. But the difference is a nuclear or a conventional power station is designed to last 50 or 60 years and generate its installed power, you know, 90+ time. So it's not sitting there idle. And that's the other thing. To support all these wind turbines and solar and even batteries, you need to have standby power sitting there at idle. So you have a power station off design point sitting there at idle so that it can be cranked up at any time when the wind drops or the sun sets. So you still need all the conventional power production systems running or as a backup when the wind and the solar don't work. Ties into my story about they're not conventional power, supplemented with wind and other things. Next slide, please. These links here, again, becoming a researcher, as Michael said, you know, becoming an expert, you have to do this. Unfortunately, we all have to do this because our institutions are meant to be for us working for us properly, and so we have to do the research and do the lobbying and do the letter writing and and we become ours. No one else, which I institutions that we developed over the century, but they've converted, I think. So Kate will have those links, can distribute them if people want them, or contact me directly. Now, I want to move on to some more hints from what we've discovered 18 months of what we've had to do. So next slide, please. I hope these will help in their own local battles. And this is, I think, key. We've been quite successful up here of informing the local community. A lot of people like us were ignorant of what was going on the quiet. We just by good facts and good information that know about the key, like what effect is it going to have on them, on their farmland, on their home, that they weren't being told. The Renewable Co or the Department of Planning, they have all this consultation, they must have community consultation, but they never really tell the key facts that they want to. So to keep our heads and begin with the end in mind is a good way to, what is our end objective here? What is our end state? And our belief up here, and I push, we've got to attack the underlying assumptions of the climate change business. If we don't show the folly of what they're talking about, then even if you have a local victory, as in solar farm is defeated, it's reduced by 352. You're still 70% lost. The momentum, the philosophy, the political economic philosophy that is pushing this agenda hasn't been defeated. Still going ahead because you haven't owned the basic tenets of their belief or their agenda. So we've got to keep, even though huge tasks to try and 20 or 30 of agenda, we've got to keep away at that, because otherwise you'll just a few turbines to the power left or right. The trajectory will remain the same, and the village down the valley next, the next region will be picked off like you were. So we'll get and keep trying to chip away at this corporate financialisation in some sort of a green agenda, because it's anything but green. It's a net loss. Local action is the foundation. Don't think you're too small or you're too isolated. Hopefully you don't feel isolated for long, because friends and others will rally around you who are in a similar situation. But you've got to have local people like yourselves, like us, are the foundation of stopping these projects or stopping it happening, because we're the ones that live here. We value our land, our business, our lifestyle, our family, and we know the lay of the land. We've got that local knowledge. So we can, like Michael said, our intelligence is better than theirs in, whichever way you take the term intelligence. We can put that together and we have the motivation to keep fighting. You're not going to get that from an outside group. You're not going to get that from hired actors of an NGO. Unfortunately, they might have the money. I don't think we've had that here yet, but you don't get paid salaried employees sticking with the project and sticking to the fight. You need to network with other groups, which Kate has done a great job, and other people in the reses and the Central West Res here under Victoria, where they've been doing this. We need mutual when you first encounter this stuff, you feel like you're alone, and you don't know. You think you're in the minority. You're a weirdo out there pushing back the tide. But there's lots of other people who trod the road and out there, and lots of research, really good research that puts the the institutions and on that. But yet we're not formed into a national group, or we don't have any overarching headquarters that we can all go to for support or to distribute information. It's up to us to locate other groups that are out there and work together. But always remember, you're not alone. So don't get disheartened. You do have support out there. We're everywhere. We are. Some other notes I made while Michael was talking. I mean, he echoed many of my thoughts. He's coming at it from a different direction slightly, but it's really, there's a lot of common themes there. Just looking at something here. Something I said to Kate before we did this was, with the reduced power production, and this might be contrary to Michael's view, but yes, fossil fuel use, he says, isn't dropping with the introduction of renewables, and I sort of see that. But if we reduce energy production or energy use, and I'm not saying we waste it, we should use it efficiently always, we will have an energy deficit. So if Liddell closes this month and they detonate it, that's economic and environmental vandalism. I mean, if we have a reduction in power available and a reduction in energy use, our quality of life or our economic activity is going to reduce along with it. Now, maybe that's the intent, but there's no way of doing that. Either we use less energy each, or there's less of us to use energy, whichever way you take that. Our standard of living and industry must shrink further than it already has. Financialisation of everything is driving this boondoggle, I say. No real intent to provide efficiently produced or affordable power. I don't think our power bill is going to go down through the increased building of renewables. It's just a financial boondoggle. Somebody that hasn't copped a lot of flack in this whole industry yet, I reckon, has a hand in it. I mean, we know big oil and big coal, and they all lobby, but I think the unmentioned profiteers and instigators are the commodity trading companies, the Glencores of the world, the Cargills and the others, because they make money as things move around, whether it's coming or going, via arbitrage and substitution. So I think the commodity trading companies are some of the biggest companies in the world, and they get off a bit scot-free. They don't get much scrutiny. They're not the name, the cereal box brand out there. They're in the background, but they're making money no matter what happens. Just local stuff. Again, the recent New South Wales election up here, this is something that worked for us, was in the federal election in the Coolah booth. I scrutineered for one of the parties and counting the votes. There's only 8 or 9 votes for Greens in the Barwon Parkes electorate, the federal electorate. And the Greens got about 3% of the vote in the Parkes electorate. And in the federal election, 6 months later or so, the Barwon electorate, which pretty much parallels Parkes, we got 9 Green votes in the Coolah booth as well. And the Green vote in Barwon went under 2%. They almost halved their vote. Now, whether they're true green candidates or not, the thing is, out here we've got a lot of problems with, we've got other issues. We don't have a bank in town. You're lucky to have a doctor in town. You got to travel 100 kilometres or more to get to any services, and the roads are crap. My internet's pretty crap, but it works. Yes, I'm happy with that. The mobile phone card pretty crap, but I live with it and it doesn't really bother me. I like being out of touch, I think, half the time. But the thing is, out here, it's been shown, the way people vote, that the green agenda is not very important. Yet we have people coming from the city, from the coast, from Energy Co, DPE, from Macquarie Street. You know, we can't get anything we want or need out here, but they want to thrust these renewable, the RES on us. You know, we didn't ask for that. No one consulted with us before they, you know, announced it. And in the grand scheme of things, it's not what everyone out here, or most people out here, and shown by the election results, it's not what we need. So to finish, I just look at all these projects and the net return, you know, the cost and the environmental cost is negative. You know, it's just pump priming, it's just financial churn, and the stated intent to produce affordable green power is the last thing that will happen in my view, from what I've looked at and learnt so far. Yeah, I wish there were better definitions and words to use, the clean versus renewable and development. We need to find other words, other language, and not use their language and not use their limited battlefield when we go into fight. We don't accept their boundaries on the discussion. Use what I call aggressive candor, and that goes to what Michael said about activism. You know, undermine the foundation, or try and undermine the foundation they stand on, and all the all the discussions, all the topics that are outside of the limits that they prescribe. Don't accept those limits. You know, don't argue on their ground. You know, argue on the totality of the ludicrousness of what they're proposing, and undermine their foundations. So thanks for listening and putting up with that. I hope it's been of some use, and yeah, happy to take questions and answer what I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. So we have gone way over time. Thank you very much for your patience with our technical difficulties. We do have a question and answer time. The one thing that I would ask is that you could answer or ask one question at a time. Would be very helpful, and keep them short and concise. And forgive me for having to mention this, but we have had it in other talks that we've done. We do understand that there are people that do have opinions on the subject and things like that, and we do appreciate that. We're happy for you to hang around and have a coffee and discuss that with us later. But if we could keep this quite tight to questions only, please. And again, one at a time, nice and prompt, because we've got the people on Skype as well. Giselle's got the mic down the back there.
Great, thanks. Hi, my name is Dr. John Shield. I've got a PhD in climate change. I used to work for Pacific Power, designing power stations. I worked for Beyond Zero Emissions, looking at stationary energy right through, and contributed more than half their reports. Half of what you just heard there doesn't stand up. Right? If you want more extreme events, if you want more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, go along with this. The power stations currently, the last time I was in Liddell, 30 years ago, was leaking through the roof. The generator was rusting. It ain't gonna last. These machines aren't gonna get built again. There'll be no more coal-fired power stations built in Australia. No one will fund them. That's the first point, okay? So I know what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to ask these guys, do you want more extreme events to occur? Because we're currently on a trajectory to about 6 degrees Celsius. Okay, and the only way we'll get that down is to actually have renewable energy. Okay, and the way you'll get renewable energy is for the rich countries to contribute. Now, according to Michael, there isn't much mitigation going on, and it's not very clean. Well, there's been about $1 trillion spent in the last year from China, about half a trillion, US about 0.2, and Europe about 0.2 EU. So it is happening, it is renewable, and it's invested in the right things. So here in this village, these two guys would say, don't build this village. This village is built out of renewable energy. Every house has enough solar on the roof to last its energy for the year, for its lifetime, for 25 years. So I'd like to ask them, do you want more extreme events? Is that how we want to go?
That was your question, John.
So, Michael, could we get you to answer that question, please?
No, I don't want more extreme events. I was delighted to hear you guys mention. Thermal mass when you were describing your buildings. How do I explain it? We need to move to more energy efficiency. I can't really respond to the commentary component of that question. So, you know, I don't know. Glencore just announced a carbon capture and storage coal-fired power station in the Surat Basin 2 days ago. So I don't know about those claims that we're not going to see any new coal-fired power stations. The HESC project in Victoria is still moving forward past the pilot phase. So we'll have to see what happens in East Gippsland with the carbon capture and storage plans there. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't want to see more extreme events.
Okay, question.
Yeah, look.
Does Grant have an answer to that question as well? Did you want to say
No, I probably don't have a complete answer. I'm just sceptical because the predictions that have been made thus far over the last 20 or 30 years from the IPCC and others, and it's well documented, haven't come to fruition. So I'm doubtful of the panic that's being generated in the community to do something. And when you have China opening like 2 coal-fired plant a week or a month or something, like whatever it is, and when you've got Germany unmothballing coal-fired stations, we seem to be doing the opposite. I mean, I'm not saying that coal is the only way to go, but money should have been invested over the years to rebuild, redevelop and update our thermal plants in line with the best practice that we could, and maintain that engineering capability and those skills and that industry before we lose them. If we lose those skills, and even now, and you might know better, we couldn't build a coal-fired plant even if we wanted to. So we're going to be left short now no matter what happens, and I don't think the rollout of so-called renewables is going to fill any gaps, because the timelines, they're way behind. Our engineering ability to build them is not there and install them. And we're still going to have massive battery or pumped hydro to fill in the wind and solar gaps. And the cost, like look at Snowy Hydro too, and the technique, and again, the engineering problems that they've had with that. And then you've got the environmental cost of mining, manufacturing batteries. It makes it doubly silly to invest, you know, throw good money after bad, chasing this renewable rainbow. That's where I sit, and I'm happy to be wrong, but I just, so far, I haven't seen any real positives out of it.
Thanks, Grant. Just before we move to the next question, again, if we can just keep it short and concise, and if I can reiterate the respectful dialogue, because there is 2 sides to an argument, and we want to present both sides. We're not here to tell you what to believe or not to believe. It's about bringing information forward. And we value the information that comes forward just as much from people with academia as we do for those that don't have the academia but live on the land. So let's have a respectful conversation. And we've lost the art of that, you know. We've lost the art of having conversations. So let's keep that in mind. Next question.
I'm very interested to hear what's been presented today, because it's not new, this idea that renewables are not actually going to meet the demand and solve the problem. I thought that slide was so informative, that showed 17% renewable energy in Europe, and then only a portion of that was really what we consider renewable, and we don't see that information. So it's really important to know and to understand how viable, you know, this agenda is that we're all being driven on. But it's very hard to sit here today and listen to these cases you're putting forward saying it's not working, it's not real, nothing's really being done, without having some positive alternative. And there's been really no presentation of that. I think human nature, I suppose, is that we can't deal with bad news unless we have some kind of vision. And I didn't know if you were advocating we use more coal or what, but I think we need a path forward if we're going to be able to even hear this information.
Thank you, Rafael.
So, Raphael, the clarity on your question is you'd like to ask these gentlemen if they've got an idea of what we can do moving forward in regards to the energy situation? What was your actual question, please?
Well, I suppose I'd like to ask it of the speakers and of anyone in this room, the organisers, anyone. What are we meant to do with this? Go home and say, oh, renewables isn't working. What do we do now?
I feel like
Hang on.
I feel like I heard very clearly from both Grant and Michael that it's up to us to really have a look. Like, this is every single thing that's happening in our community, in our area, actually needs a huge, like, I wouldn't make up my own mind until I'd done a huge amount of research into it and looked at all different sides and tried to work out where I sit. And that's the message I got strongly through from both Michael and Grant, that it's up to us. Like, we have to actually really make up our own mind and look at the research that we can and be able to robustly come to our own position. So, Michael and Grant, I don't know if there's any more you want to say to that, or, you know.
Can I say that?
You go, Michael.
Well, Buckminster Fuller said if it's worth talking about, it's worth making a model of it. And your intentional community is making a model of it. You know, I once asked a town planner who was working on a golf course estate design about, you know, orientating the houses. Was it northeast? And he just laughed at me, you know. So when I heard you guys, the description of Narara, and it included thermal mass and orientation of the dwellings, I just thought that you guys are putting the first principles out there, and we need to do things, and some of those things are insignificant, but they're great models for moving forward. And on the other side, I support the radical degrowth. So we have to make every effort we can to be as efficient as possible and to drive real reductions in energy use. That needs to be something that we're all working on. Thank you.
Yeah, and so, you know, the data was out there a while ago that 80% of the houses out in the regions in the northwest have solar, whereas you look at Palm Beach, Manly, those places, it's less than 20%. Yet they're the teal electorates that are demanding this stuff be delivered, but the ones doing it. You know, we have solar on our roof, we have a battery, we own and build our home, and it's a passive solar design, and it works quite well. And we built that back in the 90s. Now, this is, I mean, doing what's sensible and what is efficient. That's what I support. I don't do things that are inefficient and not sensible and don't deliver or don't work. And you don't keep pursuing things that don't work. But trying to produce industrial scale power from wind and solar isn't efficient for a lot of reasons. And, you know, calculated and specified by many parts of the world already. And we've got 22 years experience in Australia of wind, and they've got longer overseas. I mean, we've got the data, we've got the numbers, we know the problems. So why do we want to redo those mistakes? And as for a vision, or what is the future, or what is our way out of this problem, that's a difficult one. Yes, we've all got to be more efficient in what we do, and I would never argue again. But it's also got to be equitable. You can't have, certain sectors of society they get a grade A lifestyle, while other sectors of society get a grade C lifestyle, and maybe that's difficult to achieve. But mass generation of power through thermal processes, combined cycle gas turbines, we have gas, or whether it's nuclear, we have the resource, and those sorts of things. It can support a first world economy with a minimum of emissions, but it takes engineering nous and skills, and I'm afraid we don't have those, and that's why we have a problem that's a hole that's going to be very difficult to dig our way out of. But there's no silver bullet solutions. The solutions should have been started 40, 50 years ago, unfortunately. So we're going to be in a total pinch from now on, no matter what.
So if I can add to that, Michael and Grant, I'd love your feedback on it, that what I'm getting out of this is the way that we are proposing to move forward, which we are being told is a solution to the problem, it may be a solution to the problem in the way that we are currently living, but it could also be a detriment to nature and the planet we live on. And from my understanding, that's your greatest concern. You don't have an issue working together to solve the issue or the problem, but we do have an issue with putting things in place that are going to damage the planet further. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, I mean, all human activity, all human energy and changes the environment, and it has throughout history. The pyramids didn't just appear, they were built and change the environment, but it's how much damage do you do? And it's sort of off topic, but you've got, I haven't updated in the last couple of years, but the single biggest user of fossil fuel in the world has been the US military for decades. And we've got a war going on in Ukraine, which is consuming huge amounts of material and fuel, and fuel dumps are being blown up to deprive the enemy of fuel. Now, the amount of fossil fuel being consumed in a conflict far outweighs anything you and I can even conceptualise or use in our lifetime. And the effect of that on the environment and the waste, the sheer wanton waste, that sort of thing, if you want to stop, if you want to burn fuel in a turbine to produce electricity for peaceful industry or peaceful first world living, the first thing we should do is stop this wanton waste. But no, we don't go out, or some of us do, but we don't go out and ride in the streets and say stop or don't park them or something. In one little aspect and go, oh, we've got to build turbines of solar to save the planet, while go Ukraine or go Russia and let's consume all these materials for no net gain and to defeat humanity. I just look at the whole thing, and this is holistic, and it's holistic management, I suppose. It's different. You can't just go, we've got to do this, but ignore all that over there. I'm sorry, I'm not being very positive, but I'd like, I'd like world peace, eh?
You're being truthful, Michael. Thank you. Michael, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm all right, thanks.
No worries. Do we have another question? Do we have a question online?
We have another question.
There is
another question, John.
Can we just grab one from online first? Oh, you don't have any. Oh, sorry, Gisela. Go for it.
Kate.
Hi everyone. So my question isn't an intellectual argument about whether climate change is real or not.
Is that on? I don't think your mic's on.
Switched it off.
That's better.
Yeah, so my question is in regards to, so I haven't gone in too much into this offshore wind farms in regards to very deep research, but I have done some research and written posts on it for the website that I write for. But so my question is for you gentlemen in the know, has the National Parks New South Wales or any Sydney or Newcastle universities conducted any impact research on marine life and migrating whales, for example, or the dolphin populations and other sea life? And then what were the results? And what did that happen also when they did the seismic testing that happened a few years ago off the Central Coast?
Over to you, Michael. I've got nothing on that.
Oh, I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, don't know. No idea.
Unfortunately, these guys are both from out of town.
Maybe
John's got another question. You got another question for us? You can contribute to this one? Great, thank you.
Look, I know a little bit about offshore platforms and onshore platforms, and the south, the one down in Bass Strait. In Bass Strait, it's already been approved, the offshore. They're using the existing oil platforms in the deep sea. These are so deep that they're just tethered to the bottom with lines. So they're not anchored to the bottom directly. They're just sitting there, using lines. So the interesting thing is they're going to use existing oil platforms, and they've already been approved for marine, they already went through the environmental impact. Now, they're just replacing the oil platform with wind turbines. And they're doing something similar. I know the guys up in Newcastle now, the Newcastle offshore wind, and they're well through their regulation. I went to their presentation recently, Richard Finley Jones, and they've been taken over by this French firm, and they're about halfway through their approval process, so they'll be putting in their environmental study and all that. So the interesting thing is that, people complain about wind turbines. Think about open cut mines, coal mines, and the damage there. Just compare the difference. And I think you'll find that there's a lot more impact from coal mines than there is from wind turbines. And I'll leave it at that.
So just to clarify, you're saying that there have been environmental studies done in regards to marine life?
I said for
Sorry?
For the offshore platforms.
Yes, he said for the offshore platform there over Newcastle. Yeah.
The environmental studies have been
In
done.
Bass Strait.
were they independent or were they funded by the company though?
Well, they're always funded by the company, but they've got to get passed by the government.
So the environmental studies were funded by the company in support of the government, so they weren't independent studies. So, sorry?
If the government takes a certain amount of money from a company, and then the government says, these people over here can do the assessment, then yes, it is funded by the company, but it is independent of the company, because the government has come in between and decided who's going to do the assessment. The assessment comes back to the government.
Yes, that doesn't make them impartial, because if they're wanting to push a particular agenda or project, they will support.
We really want to get this on.
Okay.
So, no, I want you to say it again, but I want you to say it in the microphone.
No, what I was saying, so even though that may be the case, that doesn't mean that that those studies are completely impartial of what the government's agenda for wanting these projects to go ahead. Because if the government, which has been pushing it, because we all know their signatories to the UN and Sustainable Development Goals, of course they're going to support whatever study comes through with the funding, and therefore the people who are carrying out that study will then align their research findings in any way in which will support what the government's agenda is. I hope that's convoluted, but I hope you understand what I'm saying.
I definitely understand what you're saying, and I guess the biggest takeaway that I'm leaving with today is that all that glitters ain't gold. We can't necessarily believe everything that we're being told. We need to do our own research. And whether you believe it or not, I think it's always a wise idea to follow a money trail. And ask the questions of who's getting paid, who's being chosen, and what's the end result gain here. Now, there are two sides to every story. There are two sides to electric cars. There's two sides to freedom of speech. There's two sides to the whole gender debate. There's two sides to everything. And I'd like to reiterate again that, only my opinion, but we have lost the art of conversation, because we have this desperate desire need to be right, and will fight to the death, rather than be open to all sorts of possibilities and coming together to resolve the issues of us raping and pillaging this planet. We've got another question over here. Giselle, can I get you? Oh, comes on.
Sorry, John, was it? Yeah, I wasn't completely clear on what you said. So just to sort of make it more palatable for me, please leave Bass completely out of it. It's not relevant to my local area. I'd like to know, did you say that there were actual studies done in Newcastle, not Asco?
I'm saying they're halfway through Newcastle on the now platform.
So they've done studies, they've done environmental studies and all that?
Look, Dr. Richard Finley-Jones, a friend of mine, he's the one that actually started this now, Newcastle offshore wind. And he's been working on this about 10 years.
What studies, environmental studies?
No, trying to get this platform up and running.
Yeah, I'm not asking about that, I'm asking about environmental studies pertinent to that particular.
I'm saying he's been working through the process, okay, and he's gone through, I don't know how far through he is, but he's well down the track, and part of that is getting these environmental impacts done. And in the process, he's so far down the track, he attracted investment from France, which is kind of what they wanted.
Yeah, that actually doesn't sound like a
it's not complete.
I'm asking what national parks or any of those, has to your knowledge been any done independently?
I can find out. I can ask him how far, has he got anything done in writing, but I'd say it probably hasn't been.
So the answer is that, in fact, after all that, no.
Yeah, it's probably, I'm just saying it's in train. It's part of a long process. Look, Star of the South, which is Bass Strait, that's taken, I don't know, more than 10 years. And they're the most furthest advanced. It's got some proof.
But you realise there's been no environmental studies
No,
here.
not up there.
My question's now, I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
So just before we continue on, we're happy to take other questions, but Grant is going to have to leave us very shortly. And I'd like to thank Grant and Michael both for their time. Could we give them a round of applause? Thanks very much, guys. We understand if you have to leave us. That's fine. I think all our questions have been pretty much asked. Okay, Scott?
I just wanted to, I think we should wrap up.
Yeah.
I'll just say that last.
So guys, just before you go, Kate's just going to quickly talk to you about our next talk, and also the petitions of the de-amalgamation, which is vitally important. Kate. Our email addresses, and we will certainly be letting you know about our next talk and exactly where it is. Lots of interesting information coming forward about the smart cities and how they're going to affect us. Thanks again for your time and being a part of this evening, and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.